Of my essay, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, which looks like it may go on to be a lengthy series indeed. Then after the break, we're going to hear back from William H. Kennedy, who will tell us about his new project, The Occult World of Jackie Gleason. But first, Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, Part 2. In my previous essay, I explained the dollar sign and its association with the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil in the Garden of Eden. I showed that it was another form of the caduceus, the magical wand crawling with serpents that the Greek Hermes and the Roman Mercury used to transform reality. I showed that this symbol actually denotes an alchemical transmutation, such as turning lead into gold. I also talked about how the coining of money was a sort of Promethean act. Money is traditionally issued by a sovereign entity, such as a king, and it is an expression of his sovereignty. It defines the relative value of everything in his kingdom, so in a way it is like the king taking the place of God and creating his own reality. However, the actual historical roots of money are with the priesthoods of old. Money was a token that people received in exchange for their tithes to the temples. In this way, the money was metaphorically bestowed on the populace by the gods. Now, there were a few examples of predecessors, but really, historians consider the origin of coin money to be around 3000 BC in the temples of Ishtar in ancient Mesopotamia. It was created for use in a public religious rite known as, quote, sacred prostitution. The priestesses of the fertility goddess served her by offering themselves as representatives of her to male worshippers. It was thought that if the men simulated intercourse with the goddess, this would stimulate fertility in the land. A very important part of the ritual was the donation that occurred beforehand. The worshipper was expected to make offerings to the goddess in the form of wheat. This was fitting, since wheat was the main agricultural product that they were asking the goddess to stimulate the production of. During religious festivals, worshippers would bring a portion of their yearly wheat crop to the temple. After being symbolically offered to the patron god or gods, the offerings were used to feed all of the priests, priestesses, and temple support staff. In exchange for their sacrifices, the men received 1 coin for each bushel of wheat, and each coin would entitle them to a visit with one of the priestesses. This is how the coin got its name. Shekel means bushel of wheat. The coin featured a sheaf of wheat on one side and a depiction of Ishtar on the other. This identification of money with wheat continues to the present day, where words that translate as bread all over the world are used as slang terms for money. This is exactly how and why coin money was produced by the ancient Greeks as well. Beginning in 1000 BC, the Greeks minted coins as tokens given to the worshippers of Dionysus in exchange for the donation of a bull to the Dionysian temple. These bulls would all be sacrificed at the annual celebration known as, quote, the Sacred Feast, to which Dionysus himself was invited. Half of the meat would be burned in honor of the god, while the rest was shared by the congregants, all those who could furnish a coin as proof of their donation. When the large-scale minting of coins in Rome began in 269 BC, this too had a connection with the divine. The new silver coin, called the denarius, was minted in the temple of Juno Mineta. Juno was the wife of Jupiter. Mineta means to warn. This appellation of Juno's stems from an incident in which the sacred geese at her temple allegedly warned the Romans of an impending attack from the Gauls. The Romans saw Juno as the protectress of the state. The issuance of money was one of the activities in Rome that she was thought to preside over. It is from Juno's title of moneta that the English words money, monetary, and mint are derived. So that is the origin of coin money. In the ancient world, the amount of money circulating in a society was necessarily limited by the amount of gold and silver available to them to mint. This restricted the velocity of money, and thus the economic growth potential. And even if you did obtain economic growth through the increased availability of money, it could easily vanish if the coins were used to purchase imported goods. Thus, the Spanish, who looted the ancient temples of South America, covered with gold and silver, ended up losing it all within a few decades by trading with Holland and Britain. The Spaniards ended up cash poor, and the huge influx of coin created a historic period of inflation for Britain called, quote, the Great Price Revolution. Now this is both the blessing and the curse of coin money. The value is in the coin, so if you spend it, lose it, or have it stolen from you, that value is no longer in your hands. This was a major problem in the ancient and medieval world, highway robbery. Every time you went anywhere, there was some thug waiting around the corner to rape your women and steal your silver. Robin Hood and his merry men couldn't have robbed from the rich if the rich didn't go around carrying hefty sacks full of cash. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, someone finally invented a solution to this problem, and no surprise, it came from a religious temple of sorts, specifically the poor knights of the Temple of Solomon. Known in common parlance as the Knights Templar, this was an elite fighting force of Catholic monks at the forefront of the European struggle to capture and control the Holy Land in the 12th and 13th centuries. Some of their original founders and patrons were the very people essentially responsible for getting Europe involved in the Crusades in the first place. The Church granted them a charter that basically established the Templars as a law unto themselves, accountable to no one but the Pope. Thus they were able to operate autonomously at their various bases throughout Europe. The Templars began to amass wealth and power quickly. Their membership was taken from the cream of European aristocracy, and they were expected to take a vow of poverty upon joining, so each new initiate remitted to the order what was often considerable money and property. Wealthy families from all over Europe also donated lands and money as the Second Crusade mounted. The Templars set up, quote, preceptories throughout the continent. These were conducted like semi-autonomous city-states, where the knights farmed their own food, ran their own hospitals, and engaged in the manufacture of arms, textiles, and other goods. Perhaps most importantly, this allowed them to issue loans with interest, circumventing the rules against usury in other Christian nations. Previously, only Jews in Europe were permitted to charge interest, since their souls were considered lost already. At various times and places, there were even laws actually forcing Jewish merchants to engage in no other trade except banking. It was a role the community needed someone to play, but the Jews became the scapegoats when the debts got too high, and people needed to default. This happened frequently enough, and was the true cause for many medieval anti-Semitic pogroms. This is the role that the Templars essentially took over, with the blessing of the Church, at least in the beginning. The Templars were, first and foremost, the official guardians of pilgrims en route to the Holy Land. This was supposedly the reason why the order was created in the first place. In this capacity, they devised a system to protect pilgrims from robbery. Instead of loading themselves down with gold and provisions, which were likely to be stolen, the pilgrims would simply deposit some money in the form of gold or silver at the Templar preceptory nearest to their point of departure. From there they would make their way to Jerusalem along a pre-selected route consisting of a series of churches and cathedrals, which were themselves associated with nearby Templar preceptories, each featuring banking services. At this point the pilgrim would present the banker with a, quote, chit, a piece of paper that was encoded with ciphered information regarding the pilgrim's deposit at the originating bank. The pilgrim could then withdraw from the bank at his current location the amount of money he needed to pay for his stay at that particular stop on the route, or to make donations to the various churches, and he could leave the rest in his account. He could also make direct charges to the account for any goods or services which the Templars themselves were able to offer the pilgrim. The complex ciphers used by the Templars to encode their chits became famous, and one is still in use in Masonic lodges all over the world. It is thus that the word check entered into the English and French languages. Indeed, a great many Middle English words pertaining to banking and commerce seem to have originated in one way or another with the Templars. In the case of check, it came from the checkerboard cloth which the Templar merchants and bankers used to square their accounts, to, quote, check their assets and liabilities. It was thus by donations, money lending, and industrial trade that the Templars were able to expand their empire and become Europe's most powerful economic force. They were able to maintain this even after the Holy Land was finally lost in the Eighth Crusade in 1271. But now they were without a cause. Some of Europe's kings and nobles, as well as many within the Church, began to wonder what the Templars were going to do next. They had money, property, authority, horses, weapons, and a standing army with nothing to do. Many European crown heads were heavily indebted to the Templars financially, and since they were also banned by papal decree from exercising any political authority over the knights, many of these kings understandably felt threatened. There was another potential threat as well, of a more metaphysical nature. Not everyone understood exactly how the Templars had become so wealthy and powerful. It was thought that there must have been a secret to this. One rumor was that the original 9 founding Templars had discovered a treasure within or beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, where they had once housed their headquarters. Theories of a secret Templar treasure have been the subject of hundreds of books throughout the years, and this idea is even at the heart of some rituals performed by modern Freemasons. It is often suggested that the knights might have found the lost Ark of the Covenant underneath the Temple Mount. How this would have made the order wealthy, however, is something that still remains unexplained by the theorists. Another rumor floating around at the end of the 13th century was that the Templars acquired their wealth because their founders had made a pact with the devil. According to this theory, they allegedly kept the Pope under their control and compelled others to give them money through the power of witchcraft. Stories had begun to leak from disgruntled ex-knights about secret initiation rituals. Word was getting around that there was an inner circle of Templars running the show with a hidden agenda. They were said to practice bizarre rituals of idol worship. At dawn on Friday the 13th, 1307, the Knights Templar in France were arrested en masse by King Philip IV's seneschals. Philip was out to get the order. He owed them a lot of money, and they had embarrassed him by refusing him membership to their club. Now he planned to use his influence on the papacy to have them disbanded. He had already sent in spies to join the order and see if the rumors were true, that there was something unholy about the Templar initiation ceremony. What his spies reported back would make anyone's hair stand on end. When the stories of the spies are combined with the confessions of the tortured knights, a remarkably cohesive, if horrific, pattern begins to form. At initiation, new recruits were forced to kiss the naked behind of one of their new brothers, although sometimes the backside of a goat or a cat was used. They were made to spit upon the cross and revoke their Christian baptism. Some confessing knights said that they were taught by their superiors that John the Baptist was the true Christ, not Jesus. They were then introduced to their new Savior, whom they were to worship. It was a head of some sort, named, quote, Baphomet. None of the inquisitors knew what that meant at the time, and no translation was offered by any of the confessors. This, quote, Baphomet head was variously said to be that of a goat, or a bearded man, a woman, or an androgen, and it was said that it had leathery skin. Some said that it had 2 or 3 faces, or that it had, quote, feet. While it was generally described as a mummified flesh and blood relic of some sort, others said that it was a skull, or that it was made of brass or gold, or that it was merely a painting of a head. All witnesses agreed that it was terrifying to behold. They said that the head, quote, prophesied to them during the ceremonies, and that it gave them, quote, wisdom. They believed that it, quote, made them rich, and, quote, caused the land to germinate. By November 1307, even the Grand Master of the Templars himself, Jacques de Molay, had confessed to these charges and more. Pope Clement had heard enough. He issued a bull ordering the arrest of all Templars in 8 countries, including England, Ireland, Portugal, Italy, and Germany. On August 12, 1308, he drew up a list of 127 offenses with which they were charged. In addition to the various acts of blasphemy and heresy already discussed, they were also accused of homosexual orgies, baby sacrifices, and of treasonous dealings with the Muslim enemy, the Saracens. Trials dragged on for another 5 years. Many recanted their confessions, including the Grand Master, and those knights who did so were put to death in brutal ways. As he burned at the stake in 1314, Jacques de Molay uttered a curse against Pope Clement and King Philip, prophesying that they would both die within a year. They did. Other knights stuck to their confessions and were rewarded with lenient sentences of monastic penance, not much different from the ascetic lifestyle they were already used to. The order was officially disbanded by the Pope, its property given over to other monastic orders. So ended what was once the greatest military and economic power in Europe. Over 7 centuries later, the legend of the Templars and the mystery of Baphomet is alive more than ever before. Hundreds of secret societies and religious orders claim descent from the Knights Templar in some form or another. Almost all mystical Hermetic groups claim to be perpetuating the Templar tradition, including various Masonic groups, Rosicrucian groups, and ritual magic orders such as Aleister Crowley's OTO, or Order of the Oriental Templars. Rituals involving references to goats are still performed by Masons, and many Masonic scholars have written about Baphomet as being central to their mystic rites. Crowley even took on the name Baphomet as his own magical title for ritual purposes. Later, Anton LaVey from the Church of Satan made use of an image of the Baphomet goat head within a pentagram as a logo for his pop culture devil cult, the Church of Satan. But how did this image come to be the personification of the heinous Templar idol? The writer responsible for our modern understanding of Baphomet was a mid-19th century occult author named Eliphas Levi. Monsieur Levi's main thesis was that all forms of occultism and mysticism held a common secret doctrine. Ritual magic, he said, utilized the existence of what he called the, quote, astral light, defined as, quote, a natural and divine agent, at once corporeal and spiritual, an universal plastic mediator, a common receptacle for vibrations of movement and images of form, a fluid and a force, which may be called, in a sense at least, the imagination of nature. It was this agent which, he said, reflected the magician's will, expressed during a ritual, and actualized it into existence. He illustrated this concept with a hieroglyphic form which he called Baphomet, claiming that this was the spiritual principle secretly revered by the Templars. Levi used this picture as the frontispiece for a number of his books. Levi's image of Baphomet is virtually synonymous in the common mind with the image of Satan enthroned in hell. That's only because most modern